That Friday was one of those days that dragged its feet, each minute stretching into an eternity. I was slumped at my desk, mindlessly scrolling through project files, when the alert for a meeting with Catherine popped up on my screen. She was the senior director of our department, and she needed the final numbers for the quarterly report I'd been working on all week. It wasn't a major issue, just a routine check-in, so I gathered my tablet and headed toward her office. Catherine's office was at the far corner of the floor, a glass-walled space that overlooked the Chicago skyline. I'd always known her to be professional and composed, a woman who kept her work and personal life distinctly separate. I hadn't ever given her much thought beyond her role as my superior. She was likely in her early 40s, with a sharp intelligence that was both impressive and a little intimidating. She didn't look her age, but to me, she was always just Catherine, the director. That was the beginning and end of it. Nothing more. So when I tapped on her doorframe, I expected her to be focused on her monitor, but she was standing by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. She turned when she heard me, and for a moment she looked startled, her professional mask slipping just enough for me to see the exhaustion underneath. She was wearing a simple grey dress, but her hair seemed slightly out of place, as if she'd been running her hands through it. I felt a flicker of unease, unsure of how to proceed. "Is this a bad time?" I asked, hesitating in the doorway. "Hey, Marcus," she said, her voice softer than usual as she offered a faint smile. "No, not at all. I was just watching the snow." She gestured toward the window. "They're saying it's going to be a bad one." I glanced outside, my focus shifting to the thick flakes already swirling in the wind. "I just have those figures you wanted," I said, holding up my tablet like an offering. "I had no idea the forecast had gotten so serious." She let out a quiet, tired laugh and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair from her face. "Oh, it's serious," she replied, her tone a bit flat. "The whole city is shutting down. Do you want to come in for a second?" I paused, not sure if I should, but I stepped inside anyway. I mean, she was my boss, but this felt different. I had always seen her as this unshakable, commanding figure. I never imagined feeling anything other than professional respect for her. We stood by the window together, and she pointed out how quickly the streets were emptying. The initial discussion was light, centered on the weather and the looming project deadline. But as the minutes passed, I realized she was opening up in a way I'd never seen before. She spoke about the pressure of her position, how the constant demands were wearing her down, and how, despite being surrounded by a team all day, she sometimes felt completely isolated. For a short while, I didn't feel like I was talking to my department director at all. It was just her and me, sharing a moment of unexpected honesty. The way she looked at me suggested she was genuinely interested in what I had to say, not just as an employee, but as a person. It was in that moment that something inside me shifted. I began to see her in a new light. There was so much more to her than just being Catherine, the director. Then she offered a soft, almost melancholic smile. "Marcus, you've become such a reliable part of the team," she said. "It's hard to believe you started as an intern just a few years ago. I remember you being so nervous in your interview." I didn't know what to say, so I just managed a small nod. A new kind of energy was crackling between us, something unspoken but undeniably there. I could feel it, a subtle spark, a quiet tension, but I wasn't sure what it meant. I only knew that I wasn't ready to leave her office just yet. She walked over to the small coffee machine in the corner of her office, and I found myself following. As she passed, I caught the faint, clean scent of her perfume. And for that brief instant, she didn't feel like my boss at all. She was just a woman, an individual with her own story and her own struggles. "Thank you for bringing those numbers by," she added, turning back to face me. "I really needed a normal conversation today." I gave her a small smile, feeling a strange warmth spread through my chest. "Anytime," I said, and as I finally walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed between us. An unspoken seed had been planted, and I had no idea where it would lead. The next time I really spoke with Catherine, it was later that afternoon. I was at my desk trying to wrap up the last of my work before heading home, when an office-wide email announced that the building would be closing early due to the blizzard. Most of my colleagues were already packing up, a frantic energy filling the floor as people rushed to beat the worst of the storm. Catherine was holding a stack of files, her brow furrowed in concentration as she walked past my desk. For some reason, that simple image struck me. How had I never noticed the quiet elegance in the way she moved? It wasn't just her appearance, it was the focused intensity she brought to everything, a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her. I hadn't expected to interact with her again, and honestly I was unsure how to act. We hadn't spoken since that strange, vulnerable moment in her office. But something about that conversation had resonated with me. Something about her smile and the way she'd looked at me had lingered in my mind. Still, I dismissed it as a one-off, a strange product of stress and bad weather, until she stopped and looked over at me. "Marcus," she said, her voice calm and inviting. It was the kind of voice that could instantly put you at ease. I smiled back, trying to keep my own tone casual. "Hey, Catherine. Looks like we're all getting kicked out." She nodded, gesturing with the files toward her office. "Just trying to get a few things organized before I go. Are you heading out soon?" A simple question. Yet it quickly evolved into a full conversation. We talked about the project, the absurdity of the weather, and other light topics. But underneath it all, there was that thrum of something deeper. There was a subtle but palpable tension in the air. Little glances, quiet smiles, and then, unexpectedly, she asked, "Do you have a lot to finish up?" She said it nonchalantly, as if it didn't mean much, but I could tell she was testing the waters. I wasn't sure how to respond. I shrugged. "Not too much, just this last report." She smiled faintly. "David left an hour ago. I was thinking of staying a little longer to get ahead on the quarterly review. It would be great to have some company." That offer caught me completely by surprise. My immediate instinct was to politely decline. After all, besides work, what else did we have to talk about? But the way she said it made it difficult to refuse. Before I could overthink it, I heard myself saying, "Yeah, sure, I can stay." And that was that. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But later that evening, as the office emptied out and the silence grew, a sense of nervous anticipation tightened in my chest. I felt a buzz I couldn't quite explain, as if I was about to step into a place I wasn't supposed to be. As the hours passed, her office felt less like a corporate space and more like a small, insulated haven. The scent of brewing coffee filled the air, wrapping the room in a warmth that felt almost too inviting. Catherine was at her desk, humming softly to herself as she typed. I sat in one of the chairs opposite her, just observing her for a moment. And that's when it hit me. The woman in front of me didn't feel like the Catherine I thought I knew. She looked the same, yet something about her felt more authentic, more open. "Feel free to make yourself comfortable," she said without looking up. "The final draft is almost done." I leaned back in the chair, trying not to seem on edge. She moved around her office with such effortless grace, as if she belonged there in every sense of the word. Meanwhile, I sat there trying to figure out what was happening inside me. It wasn't just how she looked or how relaxed she seemed. It was how she made me feel, as if I was more than just her employee. We worked, and the conversation flowed easily between us. There were no awkward silences or forced small talk. We spoke about life and how things rarely turn out the way you plan. She talked about her college years and how she missed the thrill of spontaneity, the feeling of being excited about the unknown. She admitted that with her career taking over, everything had settled into a predictable pattern. A raw edge entered her voice when she said it. It sounded as if she'd been holding that feeling back for years, pretending everything was fine, when it wasn't. I just listened. I didn't offer any profound advice or deep insights. I just nodded and let her talk. Even as I sat there quietly, I noticed things. The way her eyes would light up when she spoke passionately about a topic. The genuine sound of her laughter. She wasn't just Catherine, the director, anymore. She was a woman, with her own thoughts, her own feelings, and a life of her own. "Thank you," I said as we finished the report, and I started to gather my things. She smiled at me, and for a fleeting moment I saw something deeper in her gaze. "I'm so glad you stayed," she said. "It's been a long time since I had a real conversation with anyone here." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave her a slight nod. But I knew we were both thinking the same thing. There was a shift between us now, something we didn't have to acknowledge out loud. When I finally stood up to leave, she walked me to the door of her office. It was a simple, professional gesture. But her hand lingered for a second too long on the doorframe as I passed, and that small moment stayed with me. "Drive safe, Marcus," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. My head was spinning as I walked back to my desk. The evening had seemed so ordinary, and yet it had shaken something loose inside of me. I couldn't put my finger on it. She hadn't done anything overtly inappropriate. But the way she looked at me, the way she listened, it made me feel like there was something real between us, a different kind of connection. I had been in this office 1,000 times, but this was not the same. And I hated how much I thought about it in the minutes that followed. I tried to push it from my mind. I tried to pretend nothing had happened. A few minutes later, my colleague David called, asking if I was still at the office. I thought maybe talking to him would help clear my head, but as soon as I answered, I saw Catherine step out of her office and look toward me. She saw me on the phone, smiled, and gave a little wave. Without thinking, I waved back. Her smile was relaxed, yet it held a warmth that hadn't been there before. That unspoken something made my stomach churn slightly. "Hey, Marcus," she said as I ended the call and walked over. "I thought you'd left." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just talking to David. I didn't realize you were still here either." She laughed lightly. "Yeah, I was just about to head out. I haven't been this late in a while." Her gaze lingered on mine for a fraction of a second too long, and just like that, the tension was back. That subtle undercurrent humming between us, always present, just below the surface. I should have walked away, should have said goodnight and headed for the elevators, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the wall near her office door. We talked, we laughed, we pretended there was nothing strange about it. Eventually, we realized we were the only two people left on the entire floor. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The building was silent except for the howling wind outside. The lights had dimmed to their overnight setting. Even with the quiet buzzing around us, my mind kept wandering. And every time Catherine looked my way, I felt it. That shift, that something her laughter or her glances stirred in me, something I didn't fully understand. We both felt like we were holding a secret that neither of us dared to speak. Then, at one point, she leaned against the wall beside me, leaving just the two of us in the dimly lit hallway. I hadn't planned on saying anything, but the words just tumbled out. "So, Catherine, how have you really been?" She paused. Her smile faded slightly, and for a moment I saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes. "I'm okay," she said quietly. Just been feeling a little stuck lately." Her honesty caught me off guard. It was as if she was peeling back a layer, revealing someone I hadn't expected, someone who wasn't just my boss. "Yeah," I replied, nodding. "I get that. It's not always easy." She returned the nod, and we stood in silence for a few moments. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, peaceful even. I wanted to say something more, something to console her, to lighten the burden she was carrying, but the words wouldn't come. So I just looked at her, wondering if she really meant it, or if maybe she was hinting at something deeper. The security guard did his final sweep, his footsteps echoing down the hall, and the moment passed. But something inside me had moved. That night, my perception of Catherine had irrevocably changed. She no longer felt like just a figure of authority. There was a different kind of light around her now, a dangerous kind. Later, when we both finally decided to leave, we walked to the elevators together. But my thoughts were stuck on that brief conversation with her. What did she mean by stuck? Was she just stressed, or was she quietly asking for something more? As soon as I got to the parking garage, I sat in my car and replayed the entire night in my head. That work session, that was a confession. That look in her eyes. It was then I realized this wasn't just some random late night at the office. Something else was happening between us, something unspoken. And whether I wanted to or not, I was being drawn into it. The scariest part, I wasn't sure I wanted to resist anymore. The next few days felt heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about that night in the office and how Catherine had opened up. Her quiet admission, her gaze lingering on mine as if she were searching for something. There was a weight in the air between us now. I couldn't shake the feeling, no matter how hard I tried. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that it was just a one-time thing. But I knew better. David and I had always been close work friends. He was a good guy. But lately, even when we were grabbing lunch, I noticed my thoughts drifting. Back to her. Back to Catherine. I hated that about myself. I hated the thoughts that refused to leave. The way she smiled. The way she carried herself. She felt different now. That Saturday, I decided I needed to clear my head. I called up David and suggested we go to the gym and play some basketball. Like old times. Maybe if I exhausted myself physically, I could quiet my mind. When I got to the court, David was already there, practicing his form. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. "About time. You're late," he teased, passing me the ball. I forced a smile, mumbling something about traffic. We played hard for the next hour, joking, talking trash, trying to one-up each other. But my head wasn't in the game. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere quiet, dimly lit, and deeply confusing. After a while, we took a break, sitting on the edge of the court. Out of nowhere, David asked, "You think Catherine is doing okay?" He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked over at me. The question blindsided me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She's just been distant lately," he said, staring at the floor. "Not her usual self. I don't know if she's stressed or what, but something feels off. I think she's going through something." That hit harder than I expected. I'd always seen Catherine as this composed, steady presence, never rattled or unsure. But maybe I was wrong. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Have you talked to her about it?" He shook his head. "Not really. Every time I try, she just brushes it off. I don't want to push, but I can tell she's not okay." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to confess, to tell him about what I'd felt and seen, the shift in both her and me. But I couldn't. Not yet, maybe not ever. "Maybe she just needs some space," I offered, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," he muttered. "Maybe." But I could hear the doubt in his voice. He wasn't buying it. We finished our game and I went home. My gut, however, stayed twisted the whole time, like I was heading towards something I couldn't prevent. The following Monday, I walked into the office, and there she was. Catherine was at the coffee station, staring into her mug. When I walked in, she looked up, smiling as if everything was perfectly normal. "Morning," she said warmly, but I could see it. The fatigue in her eyes, the slight rigidity in her posture. I knew she was playing a part. "Hey, Catherine," I said, grabbing a mug next to her. "You doing all right?" I asked, looking over at her. Catherine paused for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah, just one of those long weeks ahead." I could tell she was deflecting, treating it like it was nothing. I didn't press her on it, mostly because I didn't know how. My heart was hammering louder than I wanted to admit. So I moved on to the break room. I needed a moment to breathe, to escape the weight that hung in the air between us. But as I reached for a bottle of water from the fridge, I heard footsteps behind me. Catherine was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice calm but direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" I turned around, caught off guard. Yeah, sure. What's up?" She stepped inside, letting the door swing softly shut behind her. The space between us shrank, and I felt my chest tighten as she got closer. I wanted to thank you for the other night," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It meant a lot to me." I swallowed hard, her words hitting with more force than I anticipated. "Of course," I managed to say. "You know I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." She nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of us spoke. We were suspended in a thick, heavy silence that buzzed with everything we weren't saying. Then, almost as if to change the subject, she said, "David's a good guy. You know, he's had his share of struggles, but he has a good heart." I nodded again, unsure where this was going. But her gaze stayed on me for an extra beat. That same spark I'd felt before was back. It hummed between us like a wire stretched too tight. "Yeah," I said quietly. "He really does." She smiled, but there was something else in that smile I couldn't quite place. I wondered if she was thinking the same thing I was, and for a fleeting second I considered asking her. I almost asked what was going on here, but I didn't. I just stood there, trapped in the silence with her, wondering where this was going. Finally, she broke the moment with a quiet, "Thanks again, Marcus." "Any time," I replied, but a part of me knew I wasn't saying it the same way anymore. A week passed since that morning in the break room. The conversation hadn't been dramatic or loud, but it stayed with me. Every time I saw Catherine after that, the air felt different, charged. I couldn't tell if she felt it too, or if I was just projecting my own feelings. Either way, the dynamic between us had shifted, and I couldn't shake it. David and I hung out as usual. He laughed, joked, and did his best to keep the mood light. But it didn't help. Every time Catherine walked into a room, my eyes followed her. I noticed the little things, like the way her head tilted when she listened, the way her eyes would meet mine for just a second longer than necessary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I felt it. Then came Friday. Another storm was rolling in, this one predicted to be even worse than the last. The office was buzzing with talk of an early closure. I was supposed to have plans with friends, but I found myself lingering, not wanting to leave. It wasn't a conscious decision, but I didn't mind. The truth was, I needed the quiet. I needed space to process what was going on in my head and in my gut. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through emails, when I heard her voice from her office doorway. "Marcus!" I looked up, surprised to see her standing there. Her expression was unreadable. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was already picking up its pace. She walked toward my desk, paused for a moment, and then asked, "Can we talk?" That simple question made my stomach clench. "Yeah, of course," I said, pushing my chair back. She gestured toward her office. We weren't touching as we walked, but the space between us felt electric. The air grew heavier. Her office felt smaller. "I've been thinking about our recent conversations," she began, her voice soft and careful. "And I feel like I owe you an apology." I looked at her, blindsided. This was not where I expected this to go. "I know I've been a bit open," she explained, saying she'd been dealing with some things lately and didn't mean to unload on me. I blinked, trying to read her face. "I mean, it's fine," I finally said. "You don't have to apologize." She gave a small, warm smile at that, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't entirely convinced. There was more she wasn't saying. "I appreciate that," she replied, "but I think I might have crossed a line with you." My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and, if I was honest, quietly hoping for. I had no idea where it would lead, but I couldn't stop myself from hearing her out. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice softening, becoming more cautious. Catherine took a deep breath and looked down at her hands, which were resting on her desk. "I think you know," she said gently. "There's been something between us, and I can't keep pretending it doesn't exist." I froze. Her words hit me right in the chest, harder than I expected. Of course I'd felt it, but hearing her say it out loud made it real, tangible, and terrifying. "I'm not trying to make things awkward, Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just not sure how to handle this, but I can't keep pretending nothing is happening." I looked at her, my mind racing in a dozen different directions. Everything inside me was screaming that this was wrong, that I shouldn't be here, in this situation. And yet there I was. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to keep the whole situation from spiraling. "But I don't know what you want me to say." She met my gaze then, direct and unwavering. The office was nearly empty now, the wind rattling the huge pane of glass behind her. The stillness was thick, laden with everything we couldn't say aloud. Then she reached out. Her hand brushed against mine on the desk, a touch so light it was barely there, but it sent an electric jolt through me. My breath hitched, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. "This isn't just about work stress, Marcus," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. "I'm not sure what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." A tidal wave of emotions washed over me all at once. Guilt, curiosity, desire, fear. I was acutely aware of the risks. I knew what could happen if anyone found out about this, but I also knew the connection between us was powerful, and part of me didn't want it to stop. Just then, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the office into near darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lights in the hall and the swirling white snow outside. A collective groan echoed from the few remaining people on the floor. An announcement came over the intercom. Due to the severity of the blizzard and a power failure in the area, no one was to leave the building. We were trapped. "Are you certain?" I asked, my voice wavering in the sudden, eerie quiet. "I mean, with all this—" She nodded, her fingers curling firmly around mine. "I'm sure." And with that, the line we'd been so carefully dancing around vanished. We said nothing more. There was nothing left to say. The air had changed. We both felt the shift, the immense weight of what we had just acknowledged, trapped together in the storm. Everything changed after that night. We spent the night in the office, a year's worth of unspoken tension culminating in a few stolen hours. A year of navigating our professional lives while holding on to this quiet, secret thing we had between us. In some ways, it felt like we had lived an entire lifetime in those moments. We didn't talk much about us. What had started with a vulnerable confession during a late night at work had not disappeared. It had simply become a part of our existence. It felt strangely natural, but it was also fragile, something we held close to our chests. We agreed on one thing from the beginning: our own peace mattered, and that peace came from a trust that allowed us to share everything with each other while keeping it hidden from the rest of the world. We had built our own small space, our own miniature reality. But the guilt never fully went away. Every time I saw David, something pricked at the back of my conscience. Not because I thought he deserved to know, but because carrying a secret of this magnitude always leaves a mark. Still, I never second-guessed the choice we made. We both made it, and no matter how complicated or difficult things became, it always felt right. Catherine and I saw each other whenever we could, which wasn't often. We never pushed the boundaries at work. We kept everything discreet, quiet, and out of sight. The hardest part was the pretense. David would come by my desk, smiling and talking about a project, completely oblivious. We kept our distance, acting as if we were nothing more than a director and her subordinate. And yet those small moments, the quick shared glance across a meeting room, the subtle smile, the fleeting brush of hands when no one was looking, they became our language. They were what held us together. When we were alone, sometimes late in her office after everyone had gone home, we'd talk about what might happen if the truth ever came out. We never had a solid plan, just hazy what-ifs and half-formed ideas. But we didn't dwell on it for long. We stayed in the present, in the quiet, in-between spaces where we didn't have to justify ourselves to anyone, where we could just be. It was a calm Tuesday evening, almost a year after the blizzard that had trapped us. I was back in Catherine's office, sitting in the same chair where it had all begun. The space was still and quiet. David had left for the day, so we had the floor to ourselves again. Everything felt normal now, comfortable in a way that had once been foreign. We had learned how to exist like this, quiet, careful, and connected. We didn't need to constantly talk about our feelings anymore. The relationship had settled into something steady, something real. It was always going to be unconventional, but it had become something I couldn't imagine giving up. Catherine sat at her desk, looking as beautiful as ever. But there was a softness to her now, an ease in her posture, a serenity in her expression. It had taken time, but we had learned to carry the weight of what we had. We had grown into our secret. I had found a strange peace in it. I had learned how to make it feel like home. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked quietly, her voice warm and low, breaking the silence. I smiled and leaned back, sinking into the chair. "All the time," I admitted. "Honestly, I still can't believe we've made it this long." I looked over at her, my initial astonishment having transformed into something that felt a lot like gratitude. "It doesn't feel like a year." She let out a soft laugh and came to sit in the chair next to mine. "It doesn't, does it?" she murmured. "But at the same time, it feels like this has always been us, like this was meant to happen." I nodded slowly, reaching out and taking her hand. "Yeah, it's weird," I said. "But it's the good kind of weird. I never expected my life to look like this, but now that I'm here, I wouldn't change a thing." She tilted her head, meeting my gaze with that same look that always seemed to make the world stand still. She replied gently, "Me neither. Considering the circumstances, I think we've done pretty well. I'm glad we kept it between us." Her voice was firm, certain. It's ours. It's just ours. And she was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something we had built quietly, carefully, together. I'm happy, I said softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. We're happy. That's what matters. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there side by side, enveloped in a silence that didn't need filling. The only sound was the quiet hum of the city lights outside her window. A year had passed, a whole year of hiding in plain sight. We had somehow made it work. We kept the secret. We protected what we had. And through it all, we held on to what was most important, each other. As the evening deepened and the skyline began to glitter, one thought became clear in my mind. This was how I wanted things to stay. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and strange and difficult. But it was ours.